Right, welcome everybody to another episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon. I am your host tonight, Chris Phelps, and my co-host, and I usually say very good friend because you are a very good friend. It's not Mr. Dave Horrocks, it's Mr. Scott Weatherly from the 20th Century Geek. So welcome back, Scott. It's me and you once again, my friend.
Yeah, cheers. I'm looking forward to this one. This is a doozy of an episode. This series just gets bigger and bigger, doesn't it?
Oh, we're doing so well. So we're reviewing Chapter 14, which is Episode 6 of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. And I mean, this was 32 minutes, Scott. And I must admit, I didn't see it initially when it came out on the Friday. And we're recording this on the Monday, and I was like, I've got to watch it. And I watched it last night, and I was like, I was fanboying out something rotten. I mean, where do you want to start with it, Scott? Because I loved it.
Well, I think the first thing to start with is this is from a plot point of view, it's a very sort of slim. It's slim on plot, isn't it, really, this episode? It's 32 minutes, and it's pretty slim on plot, but it's both really important, and it was absolute kick-ass.
Yeah.
I think the only thing to mention is the plot. Is they go to the planet that they mentioned in the previous one, whatever Ahsoka told them to go to.
Tython,
there you go. And they find the magic rock that Grogu's got to sit on, and he does. And that's pretty much all he does for the whole episode. He's there, just sat, And I'll tell you what, I know that little Grogu sat on that boulder. Yeah, if that's not a statue or a figure before Christmas, I'll be shocked.
Yeah. I'm with you on that, Scott. And you know what, Scott? I said this when we reviewed a few weeks ago, right? And I want your opinion on this because I don't want to be... I love The Mandalorian. And I said when me and you did episode 3, was it, together? I said that this is sort of a show that you have to binge because I don't think... The fact that the episodes range from 50 minutes to 40 minutes to 30 minutes, even some of the first series were like 23, 24 minutes... It doesn't do it justice because the one thing I would say now, me and Dave have just reviewed, which is coming out this week as well. We've actually just reviewed Hellstrom. I mean, Scott, we're talking off the podcast, and that's been slated, but it's got an X-Files vibe to it. However, we've only reviewed the first 2 episodes. So there's 10 episodes in the series, and by the 10th episode, I'm wondering whether it's a rinse and repeat job. And it's the same thing, but there's just nothing that you care about. It's the same thing. There's a background story going on for the characters, and then they've got this, they sort of investigate different sort of things to do with Satan and all this stuff, which is what the Hellstrom stuff's on, apparently. I think with this, The Mandalorian, I think it's fantastic, and I think the production value and the fact that it's in the Star Wars universe does it a lot of favours for the... Because I'm going to be honest now, Scott, I love it, and I will, if I could buy this on Blu-ray, I'll buy The Mandalorian. I think it's fantastic. However, I said it in episode 3 and then episode 4 that completely... was like, oh my God, it's completely different. And this was a brilliant episode, and it really was. But it's becoming a little bit predictable each episode for me that he ends up on a planet or he ends somewhere. Like last week, we had Carl Weathers and his character, and Gina Carano, who she's Cara Dunn, isn't she? And she's like the Marshal now. Which I must admit I have got a bit of a crush on. I must admit, but a very good-looking lady. But what I would say is it's the same thing every episode, but it's hidden very well because it's so fucking good.
It is.
I don't know what you think.
No, I agree. I think the thing to remember about this is it's not. We have sort of watched things where. You mentioned the X-Files before, like just then. That's episodic in the sense of like it's Monster of the Week. This week they go off and they'll do the Leech Man, and then they'll go and do an alien investigation, and then it's Bigfoot, something like that. So each episode is a self-contained story in a much wider arc. Buffy was the same. There was a wide arc. There was the big bad for the season, but then you'd have episodes within it that were Monster of the Week. This isn't. This is long-form narrative. But really, to me, this goes back to really the sort of the source of all of Star Wars and Indiana Jones and everything that sort of like Lucas and Spielberg used to kick this off. This is nothing more than an adventure serial. You know, this is like your Flash Gordons and your Buck Rogers and all that sort of stuff that that would have been tracked out to cinemas weekly, you know, back in the day. And you'd go and see it on your weekly sort of cinema spiel with some cartoons and a newsreel, like in the 30s and 50s to the 50s. That's what this is. So every episode is a sort of like, tune in next week for the ongoing adventures of Mando. And that's how it feels. It's pulpy. It's a pulp adventure there's no mistake that they call these chapters. This is a book. You know, this is sort of like a pulp fiction, a pulpy sort of novel, where every chapter is supposed to give you a cliffhanger ending, where it's sort of like, okay, well, you've had this run in and you've had your action and all this other stuff, and now here's your information, your little exposition dump or your little hook for you to come back for the next episode. That's what it is. That's all it is. And that's sort of like what Lone Wolf and Cub was, or some of these other stories. It's clearly homaging and emulating. So it does tack into that. I'm sort of fine with it, to be honest, because I recognise that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not trying to be the bad guy. I'm gonna sound like the bad guy again because there's something else I'll pick up on. But I love it, Scott. And at the moment, this episode, Chapter 14, is at 100% Rotten Tomatoes. It's absolutely, and I do think it's probably one of my standout episodes. So this is going to sound unusual that I'm actually sort of going for it slightly. But I tell you one thing that pisses me off more than anything with Star Wars now. And it was never pointed out to me until we did our collaboration, me, you, Mike, and Dave, and we went through every single Star Wars, didn't we, leading up to The Rise of Skywalker, is how bad the stormtroopers are at shooting. Now, I know it's become an absolute joke now, and people just parody it. They even parody it themselves within the movies now and stuff like that. But when as a big gamer, when you're playing these games now, I've just gone through, and I've mentioned this on Comics Emo, I've just gone through Miles Morales, right, on the PS5. I absolutely love it. Completely missed the 2018 game, made by the same company, Insomniac. But I've gone through this and I fell in love with it. So much so that I ended up with both versions, the remaster. So I've gone back on the Peter Parker adventures and I love it. However, you're fighting against a load of jobbers as a wrestler yourself. You understand that. You're fighting against a load of jabronis like Louis Spicoli's and Barry Horowitz's throughout the whole film. We've got the same tracksuits on and the same crowbars or whatever. Miles, they're all like electrified baddies, but they've all got like bionic arms because he's got electric powers and all this. And it's the same stuff until you get to a proper middle tier or end game baddie, a proper big, someone you've really got a battle with. And that's what it feels like. So this whole episode was brilliant. But there's fucking stormtroopers literally in front of that girl who I still don't believe that she survived that anyway from being killed off. That is just unbelievable. But the shooting is brilliant and that. But it was what turned it for me, and we got to talk about it, is the fact that Dave, sorry, I said it to you last time, Scott, I've done so many podcasts with Dave, Scott, sorry, is when it was confirmed that guy chasing Mando was actually Boba Fett. I was proper fanboying out at that point.
Oh, well, this series has just been, particularly, it's been sort of like fanboy moment after fanboy moment, hasn't it? And it's teased stuff, like since that first episode when you had like Cobb Vanth come out in, Boba Fett's armor, and then you sort of saw Tamara Morrison at the end of the episode, and you were like, oh, that's it, he's coming back. And this episode is obviously the follow-up to that. But I love the way it's all played. Like you mentioned, like a wrestling match. It's all sort of really simple stuff. I mean, you're right. People are going, I'm just looking at on IMDb and stuff, and people are going mad for this episode, and rightfully so, because it's a ton of fun. But everything in this episode is almost like wrestling angle, like 101. You have like, Mandalorian is sort of like your main face, as it were, being attacked by some sort of heel stable in the stormtroopers. And you're right, they are terrible shots, but there's some shots in this where they do shoot him like in his chest plate and all this other stuff. So you get to see how sort of like cool his armor is. And then they play out this whole battle And there's some good moments. I mean, they bring out like a massive like laser railgun, like a massive Gatling gun that's firing lasers, and that dude gets taken out with a boulder, and I thought that was quite cool. But then to introduce sort of like his support, so you got Ming-Na Wen as what's her name, Fennec? That's it, yeah, Fennec.
Yeah.
So she's coming in and she's got a side character, and she's badass. I think she's absolutely great in this series. But you know, it's almost like having, you know, I'm going to use, if you were to have, say, like, you know, someone like The Rock in early 2000s, you know, he's the younger person, he's there to do whatever is the face, and then all of a sudden you had Hulk Hogan coming in to back him up.
Yeah.
That's how I felt when Boba Fett turned up in his armour and just starts battering people. I was
so
pumping the air, because you knew it's happening, because obviously he's tracked the armour, they've come to the planet, and that moment when they're all fighting and he just gets through them all with his sort of hand-to-hand combat, and he stops and he sees the Razor Crest, and you sort of, even then he's like, you know, he's looking at him and going, go on, put on the armour, put on... And when he comes in his jetpack and just starts beating people, it's like, yeah, it was probably a proper fist pumping moment. It was brilliant.
Yeah, honestly, I was exactly the same. I genuinely was like, oh, fucking yes. It was like proper... it was tingle down the spine job, you know, like proper shivers. I mean that, you know, the hairs on my arm went up and everything, because I thought before that, he's so gruesome. The fighting was up a different level even to the Mandalorian that we'd seen. Proper graphic, the way he stabbed them and whacked their heads. And we actually saw like the stormtroopers' bloody helmets completely destroyed. I will say though, Scott, it's proper leading on. And quite rightly, we could have a Boba Fett Origins movie off this Mandalorian, as in they might cross over, but you could literally go with the whole Boba Fett thing. Not necessarily what's happened next after Return of the Jedi and stuff, but like what he's doing going forward, and how he, you know, he mentions Django, his old man, and all that. And I loved it, I must admit as well. The only thing that was a bit continuity wise, there was no way that was Tamara Morrison in that outfit when he was fighting everyone. That was some bow-legged fucking martial artist. And then when he had the gear on, I was like, this just does not even look anything remotely like him. But I can forgive that, because he needed somebody with martial arts skills to do all the stuff he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bonus, and that's the beauty of the sort of like the, you know, the Mandalorian helmet, isn't it, really? You can just, if you really, even like, was it Pedro Pascal hasn't been on set every day. No, but, you know, so yeah, I forgive that sort of thing. Like there's a few times where you do go, yeah, it's clearly not Tamara Morrison, but like I'm not going to be that worried about it. But yeah, I thought it was I just thought it was ace in that sense of like you said, proper spine tingling. But more than that, like up until now, they've all been like cameos. You know, sort of like walk on past. Even like Ahsoka, like she comes in, does her thing, and then she's like, no, you've got to go to this Jedi planet and do this thing. And then she buggers off to carry on doing her sort of, you know, search for Thrawn. But this one, I mean, we'll get to the talking about the ending of this episode as well in a bit, but like this one sort of felt like the first step to the end game of this season. You know, that's sort of like, okay, we're getting the gang together. And in the first one, you had... What was it like? You had Carl Weathers and what's her name? Gina Carano.
Gina Carano.
Cara Dune. And you had that sort of like that small band. And I get the feeling they're going to do something similar for this one, where they're going to be like, right, we're going to go up against Moff Gideon, you know, the sort of the dude, the sort of the evil Empire dude. They're going to go up against them, and you're going to have him with his dark saber. And you're probably going to have sort of like, you know, Bo-Katan and Ahsoka and Boba Fett. Like, you're going to see all of those on screen together. I'm convinced of it in that final episode. Fighting stormtroopers. Like, you're going to see a lightsaber versus a dark saber fight in that final episode. That's my prediction from watching. You know, I'm thinking, right, this is, what was this episode? Well, it says it's chapter 14, but I suppose it's episode 6, wasn't it? So you got 7 and 8 to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So like we're building up to that final big fight now, so that's why I just got more and more excited towards the end of this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not going to shit on it anymore. These are just observations that I'd seen. But I'm proper on this now, Scott. And like I'd said a few to say to Dave, I said to you, and I've said it on this episode already, so please forgive me for repeating myself. But if you haven't watched it, please go from the start and just binge it. This deserves to be binged because there's just so much context to the Star Wars world that I don't know anything about this. I'm a baby compared to Mike, and we both are, aren't we? As much as we know, we think stuff. I mean, I said it last time. I'm sat here. My mate bought me the other day. He bought it last year, and I've not seen him for a while. He brings me a massive Star Wars mug that he got from over in America, at Disney. And I've got all Star Wars stuff around my room, as well as my gaming and my football stuff and all that. And I've got a big picture of the Joker in front of me, Heath Ledger. But it just... There's so many things. I've got pop culture thing, but I am so in my infancy with Star Wars. You think you know stuff, and all I know is the movies. And when these things are coming on, it's great to listen to what Mike says. So we've got Mike coming up at the end as well, so it's really good what he says. But I just purely as a Star Wars fan, Scott, and I know you've just said this, I cannot wait for these next 2 episodes. I just hope that we get not necessarily full closure, but we might see the demise of Moff Gideon and then bring another baddie into it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be something. Like, I think this is going to be a stepping stone to something bigger and better. Probably like, say, Thrawn or someone like that. But one of the things about this, recently... I know that on the Comics in Motion network, you recorded Comics on Trial, and there was the discussion around Rise of Skywalker. And I'm not going to spoil that debate or what the conclusion of that was, but I have my feelings around the sort of the sequel trilogy. They're okay. But I hate Rise of Skywalker. I think it's awful. I think it's a dreadful film, and it tinged Star Wars for me for a while. And it keeps trying to go for cheap moments in that film, where it tries to sort of go, look at this, we saved C-3PO, and oh no, Chewie's not dead, and now we're going to introduce this thing and that thing, and you're trying to get the pops out of it, and even the bit where sort of at the end of it you get all the Jedi voices, which I hate. It felt cheap, and so I was always very disappointed. Watching The Mandalorian, which seems to be painted weirdly, considering it's on the small screen, it's designed for TV and stuff, feels like it's actually painted on a larger canvas.
Yeah.
Because you've got, with the Skywalker saga, you've got, here's these massive space battles, and it's to do with the Imperial whatever, and da-da-da. But it all keeps coming back to this one lineage, and it feels actually really small. With this, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have Jedi, and we're going to have the Empire, and then we're going to tap into this planet and that planet, and they're going to have their own culture and this sort of thing, and actually get into the sort of the impact of the Empire falling apart, and all this stuff. And you feel that there's a wider, much more sort of textured, tapestry around this story, despite it being quite a linear sort of central story. So when you start to get these little winks and nods to the wider sort of Star Wars universe that this film, this series can do, we've had Ahsoka, and Cobb Vanth was mentioned in the books before this, and we're clearly going to get others. And now you've got Boba Fett back from the films and given and actually made cool, not just being jobbed out to a bloody sand mouth. This thing's Boba Fett is now badass again, and all I can get is this show. This is Star Wars now to me.
Let's be honest, right? The original Star Wars stuff, I loved. Absolutely, we've gone through them. There's some absolute classics there. My personal favourite is Return of the Jedi. I know everyone's his Empire, but I have a soft spot for the Return of the Jedi, despite the Ewoks and things like that. I do think it's a good movie because I like I'm more of a completionist when it comes to these things. I like the conclusion. I like Empire, but I don't like the fact that the actual Empire got the upper hand. As a movie, it's a fantastic movie, but I like the fact that in Return of the Jedi, the goodies win. Which really, when you watch stuff like this, what I found really bizarre is I lived my life until The Phantom Menace came out of Star Wars. The good was the rebels, the bad was the Empire, and it's the German thing, wasn't it? Like they're based on the Nazis and all that stuff. But what I found really interesting is Star Wars, and we know this from Mike. Mike's explained it far better than I can, but they just basically obliterate all the stories that have come before and after, as long as it means it. Because what is the point of the end of Return of the Jedi? And I said this the other week. If the Empire is still there fucking around in the background, they even say it in this episode, the back, Boba Fett says it, doesn't he? Went, the back, and he went, what do you mean? He goes, the Empire are back, and they take the baby away, Grogu. And it's like, but what is the point? Even through the Mandalorian, because it's set between Empire and obviously The Force Awakens and stuff like that. Oh, it's 5 years after Empire, Return of the Jedi. What was the whole point of Return of the Jedi then, if the Empire is still going to be the conniving bastards that they were in them films? So I think I look at it from differently. Like, I try and take it at face value, but I also think it's just the stories and the loops and the things they do. I know there's a comic somewhere that Mike will tell me off about. So, sorry, Mike, I'm not trying to be a bad guy or anything. I just have to take it for what it is. And I'll be honest now, Scott, there's some cracking movies. And I know you don't like Rise of Skywalker. There's a couple of bits in it that I love. The Force Awakens, I like The Last Jedi, especially the scene with Snoke, with Rey and Kylo Ren. I like that thing where he's going to become good, and he becomes good at the end of Rise of Skywalker. Spoilers, everyone, sorry. But I think The Mandalorian is the best thing that they've ever done for Star Wars. I think it's better than any of the movies that have come before, because it's just contained. It's probably cinematography as well helps. And I know that this wouldn't have come if it wasn't for what was built before and this whole world and everything. But I think The Mandalorian as a standalone thing is better than any of the movies now.
No, I would probably agree with you, to fit. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, is there another franchise really where what would probably be considered secondary material, and in this case I would say Mandalorian, the Clone Wars animated series, Rebels, all those kinds of things, they're almost now held in higher regard for storytelling and presentation than the movies. I don't think that happens often, where, like you say, the secondary material becomes even more important and beloved than the main franchise. And I think that's the case. And I agree. I think that The Mandalorian is probably quickly becoming the crown jewel of that concept, because it taps into all those things. Like, we've now had. I mean, you're right about sort of, the Empire still about 5 years later. I mean, it's not totally. It's still like the remnants, and I kind of like that. They're in slightly better order than I would expect, but that's fine. But yeah, so I was just saying. But the thing is, though, with all this, it's sort of, I think it's less tied down, and I think that's what's better about it. Like, it can literally go off and do anything it wants. And and that gives it a freedom to be a bit more interesting than the films.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. They can tell their narrative, because some of the characters been introduced in this, like Carl Weathers' character, Gina Carano's character could have her own spin-off, The Marshals, because I think that might be her next move. That's possibly going to be the spin-off. But Boba Fett is definitely there. These are stories to be told. So I think they're doing a better job of expanding the Star Wars universe without having anybody related to the Skywalker saga. Pretty much. I know Boba Fett was there for, he gave up Han Solo, then he captured him and all that stuff, and he pretty much died in Return of the Jedi as far as we knew, but he had this mythical following for years, didn't he? I even called it out, saying it's a load of nonsense. I had the figure and everything, Boba Fett, but it was always nonsense to me, that they absolutely, way people were creaming themselves over him. But when you see this, I think this is more of a story and it's more of a character, and he doesn't even have to see his face to buy into what he's doing, and I think that's really good. And it's funny you said that about Pedro Pascal, because I was watching it when he was running up and down the hills, and I'm thinking he's probably just filming his voice scenes. He's probably not even him dressed in that suit in any of these episodes. It could be any fucker dressed up, as long as they're the same height and weight. It doesn't matter who it is. It's probably not him.
I bet I can imagine he reads the script, and I'm not saying he does this because he's a very fit and sort of he's probably an honest actor, but if it was me, I'd probably read the script and then I'd be on the phone to Jon Favreau and be like, this one where I have to climb this mountain, Yeah, you're going to get the stuntman doing that one. I'm not doing that one. It's all right, thanks. We're not in that heavy armor. But I'll tell you what, the thing is, I think, you and I have sort of talked about the MCU, and I know it's a separate thing, but the moment in Avengers Endgame when you finally see Captain America pick up Mjolnir, and then you've got the portals moment, right? So moments like that where, like you say, you get goosebumps and you're sort of like, yes, and you get your fist pumping, that sort of thing. Like you have to earn moments like that. And they tried for it in Rise of Skywalker, and for me it fell completely flat. But the moment that, like you say, Boba Fett came back in and became badass again, because you're right, because like I said earlier in the episode, in Return of the Jedi, when he gets knocked into the whatever the bloody thing's called in the desert, for the life of me, I can't remember what it's called now, which is terrible, but Sarlacc pit. There you go. He gets knocked into the Sarlacc pit.
Yeah,
like he comes across like an absolute knob, because it's sort of like, well, sorry, you're supposed to be this badass bounty hunter, and you literally just got knocked into a pit. That's ridiculous. But in this one, he comes back and he's all scarred, and he's hunted down his armor, and you're like, no, you fought your way out of that Sarlacc pit, and you've now tracked down your armor, and now I've watched you beat stormtroopers in hand-to-hand combat and all this other stuff. Then you get your armor and you're still badass. Like, this episode seems to redeem Boba Fett completely. You're like, oh no, he is brilliant and he is actually badass, and all that stuff that we've always been led to believe is true. Here's to show you why. And you see, you're right. I think this is doing better to redeem certain things in the Star Wars universe than any of those films. And it's getting to that point where I'm going to have that MCU moment of like, yes, it's exactly what I want. You know what I mean? Where your heart's going to be pumping, you're going to get the goosebumps and all that kind of stuff. It's coming to it. I'm so excited for that final episode to see where this goes now.
I am. No, you're right, Scott, and it's great to have that sort of speculation. And we're both talking as just fans of the series, not an absolute passionate historian like Mike is of it. It's just nice to be able to chat about the episode. But yeah, as a if I was scoring it, it'd probably go to the Comics Emotion top score this episode, because it's 32 minutes. It is the same formula, but it doesn't matter when it's so good, and it is good. And the bits with Boba Fett are brilliant, because he even outshines the Mandalorian, which is no mean feat, because I love when the Mandalorian's on. I love his armor. I love the badass stuff about him, the fact that he don't give a shit. He can take on 6 or 7 guys and just decimate them. But Boba Fett comes in and, just as I always say, takes names, and he absolutely steals it, and it's brilliant. And it's the fact that he even says to him, we're in debt to you till we can get the baby back. So we're going to see more of him, which is brilliant for me.
The one thing I'll say before we sort of, as we close it out, because you mentioned about Baby Yoda or Grogu, he gets kidnapped and taken at the end of the episode. And the other thing that they sort of worked at is it's not just all been action and fan service. Like, this series in particular has really worked to develop the relationship between Mandalorian and Grogu. And so, like, you had last episode where, like, even Ahsoka's like, no, he's got an attachment to you, which means he can't be trained and all this other stuff. And you sort of felt it more then. But the start of this episode, the first couple of minutes of this episode where they're on the Razor Crest, and he's sort of like, he's got the little silver ball, and he's getting him to sort of use the Force to sort of pull the ball back and stuff. And he keeps calling him Grogu, so he'll respond to his name. Was really touching. And they've built that moment up, and they've obviously built that relationship. And he is constantly defending, like he's, putting himself in the line of fire to protect him. So that when he gets taken by the Dark Troopers, or whatever they're called, I think they're called, that's going to be for Mike to explain that one. But the sort of the weird robot Dark Trooper things at the end of the episode, when they take Grogu, and Mando's response to all that, like, you feel it, like, that's going to be, this is almost like, it means something. It's not just him sort of going, oh yeah, he's going to protect, because he's got to protect him because he's the cute one. Like, no, you feel like he does feel like a paternal responsibility for Grogu now. So it's almost going to be like a dad going to war to protect his kid. It's not just we say, it's going to be kick-ass, it's going to be amazing to see Boba Fett, but like, this thing has got heart as well. So that's where I can feel like, he's going to be calling in favors to go up against Moff Gideon. So that's why I'm like, they get this balance right throughout all of this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the one thing I would say is growing up watching the original Star Wars movies, there was only ever a select few people could go up against the Empire. Mm. So even all the rebels and everything, and you've got like Boba Fett and people like that, nobody would step up against the Empire other than Luke Skywalker. Obviously you've got your Obi-Wans, people like that. But there was a very, very select few would have a go. And I think with this, what's good about it is you're just getting normal people or like scavengers or whoever who don't give a shit about the Empire, not just because of what's just happened in Return of the Jedi 5 years earlier and they're not the power they were, but just showing that Boba Fett isn't just a bounty hunter. He's someone who can kick the shit out of any normal stormtrooper and stuff like that. I mean, he's not really... All right, he did last week slightly, but he hasn't really come up with a lot of... He's never come up against anyone properly from the Empire, has he, yet, with a lightsaber and everything, because we grew up thinking that the lightsaber was the best weapon ever. It outstripped anything. You know what I mean? You could fucking fire a Death Star at it and it pretty much deflect it, wouldn't it? It's stupid, but that's how we grew up. So I'm interested because obviously Moff Gideon showed a completely different lightsaber to the child, to Grogu. So how is that going to play out? Because when we saw Finn, who was a stormtrooper who obviously couldn't aim for shit, but Finn, for some reason, give Kylo Ren a good going over until Kylo got him. And obviously that's when we got Rey with the lightsaber and that in Force Awakens. But my whole life was about lightsaber and the fact that nobody would go up against the Empire like Darth Vader and a Jedi, especially a bad Jedi Master. You know what I mean? Like even, what's his name? Kylo Ren and people like that. Nobody can compete. They're like I said, like a computer game. They're the end bad guys that normal people just get crushed. And that's where I think this does a better job of saying, actually, there's plenty of people out there who can stand the ground against the Empire. They might not always win, but they know there's a lot of them. It's like that. We're protecting the village. We don't want to fight and all this shit. But really, there is. And I like what they do in The Mandalorian, that they've actually got a bit of bollocks in the people, not just people part of the rebels or who are related to fucking Skywalkers.
No, I agree. I love it. Yeah, exactly. It's like a wider universe. I mean, on that note, I don't know if you ever saw it, but this episode, and there's been a previous one as well in this series, sort of like the first episode, really, reminded me of the Joss Whedon series from the early 2000s, Firefly, which had like Nathan Fillion in and others. That was very similar. It was like a Western in space, but it was like a bunch of sort of like roughshod, sort of like roughnecks on a ship, and they were generally good, but like, they would do bad things, like for the right reasons and stuff. It has that sort of feeling, so it makes me sort of miss that show, and I'll go back and watch that at some point soon. But that's a great callback, because that balance just works so well of regular people stepping up to the authoritarian.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to sort of tackle on, just final thing before we go on to it, one of the final scenes you just mentioned there about what Moff Gideon sort of threatens Grogu with the dark saber, which is really cool. But before he gets to that point, just before that, they've got Grogu in a cell, and he's basically kicking the shit out of two stormtroopers using the Force.
Yeah.
And I laughed my ass off. I thought it was really funny, but there was a part of me that was like, at one point, like, he grabs them. I was like, is he going to Force choke some stormtroopers to death?
Yeah, I thought that.
I thought, like, oh my God, like, are we going to get like a dark... is Baby Yoda's Grogu going to go to the dark side and just like force choking people left and right?
Yeah, I thought the same. It was very reminiscent, that scene as well, of Star Wars with Princess Leia.
Yes.
When they go in, when they capture her, Darth Vader goes in and they have that thing to manipulate her, don't they, to get the information out of her. But yeah, I think that's a very good point. And to be honest, Scott, I think that's a good point leading on to Mike, because we have got a bit of an insertion from Mike here, guys. So Mike is the presenter of this show. We really appreciate it. And I think Mike's going to be back the next 2 episodes as well to finish out the series. So have a listen to this and leave it all to Mike, I think, because he's got some great explanations about today's episode.
Hey there guys, it is Mike back once again for another nugget of information for The Mandalorian, and this is for Chapter 14, The Tragedy, which is Episode 6 of Season 2, and there's a few things to explain here, not quite as much as last week, so hopefully you won't hear me talking for like 15-20 minutes, so let's get on to it. So one thing I wanted to clarify was, on the 4th episode of this Mandalorian special where I was on and speaking with Dave, Dark Troopers were mentioned, and I gave an explanation, I gave a couple of explanations of what the Dark Troopers were due to Legends, and there was one part that I got slightly wrong, and of course, the part I got slightly wrong was the exact thing that was in The Mandalorian. So just for clarity again, in episode 4 I mentioned that Dark Troopers were Stormtroopers with dark side abilities. That is correct. Those are Dark Troopers that are Stormtroopers, which are in Legends but are only in like 1 or 2 Legends releases. The Dark Troopers which showed up in this episode of The Mandalorian, which are droids, they are more prominent in Legends. They are, I believe, in the Dark Forces video game, and I think they show up in like the odd thing here and there as well. In Legends, the Dark Trooper droids, they were not Force sensitive or even Force imbued, like I'd said previously, so I hold my hands up and say I was mistaken in that regard. What it is actually that they were basically resistant to lightsabers, from what I can tell. So they were made of a specific type of metal, which to my knowledge isn't actually in the canon at the moment, but there is a lot of rumblings and rumours that they may be made out of Beskar, which would obviously be the ultimate insult to the Mandalorian, and it would explain how the client in Season 1 had so much Beskar to give to Din Djarin. It would explain that, also how has Moff Gideon got the Darksaber. There's probably some sort of thing where they have now control of several Mandalorian worlds. From that, they've got access to Beskar. And if Beskar is like the other material was in Legends, which is lightsaber resistant, if Beskar is also lightsaber resistant in the new canon, it would mean that those droids are very, very hard to destroy, because not only if it's lightsaber resistant, then obviously if Ahsoka or any other Jedi comes into contact with them, or the Darksaber, that will be challenging in its own right, but also as seen by the Mandalorian's Beskar armor, Beskar is very hard to penetrate or pierce with just standard blaster bolts, which just adds another layer of resistance to these droids already. So yeah, in short, there's generally 2 types of Dark Troopers in Legends. One that's not very common, which is Stormtroopers who are dark side or have dark side abilities, which is what I thought it was going to be. Or there's Dark Troopers, which are droids, which are made out of a lightsaber and blaster resistant metal, and that's what it seems to be in this one. So in addition to that as well, there's a bit more information. So obviously the big thing is that Boba Fett has shown up in this. Obviously in canon, the last time we saw Boba Fett was falling into the Great Pit of Carkoon, which is a Sarlacc in Return of the Jedi. And it's meant to be, you fall in there, you get dissolved for ages. In Legends, you get consumed by the tentacles and your consciousness kind of half merges with the Sarlacc. I don't think in the new canon it's going that much into the complications. But in Legends, Boba Fett survived. I think I tackled this vaguely in another episode. So I'm not going to repeat that. I think that was on episode 1 where you saw Boba Fett appear. So I just gave, I confirmed he was an unaltered clone and this sort of other things. A lot of people, some people are moaning that Temuera Morrison as Boba Fett. I do not. I think he's amazing. It makes complete sense because Boba Fett is an unaltered clone of Jango Fett. So it just makes sense. I know a lot of people are upset because he dubbed over the voice in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi when they remastered it all, but I just think it all ties things up nicely. So I'm not really married to a specific voice actor being attached to one character if in the canon it makes more sense to replace it with other people. Maybe a controversial opinion, but I just thought I'd give that anyway. But also Boba Fett, he has a staff which is quite interesting, and it's actually called I may be mispronouncing this, a Gaddafi stick, but the Gaddafi stick is essentially a weapon used by Tusken Raiders. It's a dense, blunt object that also has a spike in it. Tusken Raiders usually use it to beat people to death. So, fun times there. But it's quite interesting in that regard. It does raise a couple of questions of if Boba Fett had his ship, which seems to be the Slave One, which is obviously what he's famous for having, and I believe that's what Jango Fett had as well in the prequels. Why was he on Tatooine for so long? Why didn't he just take the armor from Cobb Vanth? There's all these questions. Hopefully they'll get answered. We'll find out. I'm sure Boba Fett will have some degree of explanation as to why he didn't just, go in gung-ho and steal the armor from Cobb Vanth, but I guess we'll see. You also see that Boba Fett has some, burn marks and things on his face, which would be from the Sarlacc pit. So in addition to that, you've got the Razor Crest exploding, which is unexpected and terrible. That's made me very sad because the Razor Crest is such a cool vehicle. Hopefully he'll get a new one and it will be really cool, but we'll see about that. I just thought I'd mention that's upset me as well. The Seeing Stone, from what I can find, is not anywhere in Canon or Legends. The Seeing Stone is something brand new to the Star Wars galaxy, so that's quite exciting. I also can't remember if I actually mentioned specifically on the nuggets of information, so apologies if I'm repeating myself, but I was going to say that I think some of the Jedi that it could be that Grogu reached out to, obviously there's a chance that Grogu reached out and nothing happened, and the whole Seeing Stone thing was just a way of Gideon as a plot device, a way for Moff Gideon to kind of capture him and whatnot. But obviously Luke Skywalker is the big one that everyone's kind of, thinking it's probably going to be, which if Sebastian Stan plays him, which is the guy who most people would know as Bucky Barnes / the Winter Soldier from the MCU, obviously he's already involved with Disney stuff, and I think he's doing the show Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I presume is filming around the same time and probably at the same location as Mandalorian is, especially if they're using the same sort of technology, so it would make sense for him to play a young one, who knows. There's a character, Ezra Bridger, who is in Star Wars Rebels. I won't delve into the ins and outs of that, but he is fairly entangled with Thrawn, shall I say. I don't want to spoil the end of Rebels, but people who've seen Rebels know what I mean. People who haven't just know that because Thrawn's back, Ezra probably is too. There's also Cal Kestis, who is the main protagonist from the Jedi Fallen Order games, and I know the actor who plays him, and they've been doing this a lot recently with video games, which works really well, is that the actor who plays him, they've modelled the face of the character after the actor himself. So, because of that, it would be quite easy for him to go into live action because he would actually look very, very similar to how he looks in the sort of computer generated style in the video game. And Jedi Fallen Order is a brilliant game, but it is one of those things where they have a kind of a weird tightrope, because the problem is that any characters they have which are in that weird in between 19 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, if there's any Jedi there that were about, such as Cal Kestis, why did they not get involved in Galactic Civil War, it's called, and why didn't they help Luke, and why didn't Yoda know about them, and all these sorts of other things? So chances are Cal Kestis probably won't show up, but he could do. Another person as well is Quinlan Vos, who we know survived Order 66, I'm pretty sure, and he is actually one who you can see him for a few seconds in Phantom Menace, and then he's in the Clone Wars a little bit, he's in the Dark Disciple book, which is about him, Dooku, and Asajj Ventress. In Clone Wars, he's the one who, I think he's basically got dreadlocks. He has a yellow sort of line of paint across the center of his face, and he has psychometry, which is the same power that Cal Kestis from Jedi Fallen Order has. Essentially, you touch an object and you can kind of, to some degree, read or feel its history and things like that. It makes him incredibly good at tracking, and Quinlan Vos and Obi-Wan do clash a bit in the Clone Wars episodes that they're in together. Quinlan Vos is quite a cool character. He's been around for a while, and as I said, to my knowledge, he was mentioned as being alive in one of the Vader comics when Vader's kind of like going around and hunting down other Jedi, but I don't think he's been mentioned anywhere else. So generally, as a kind of, to try and finalise this point, others are going to be rambling forever. So Luke Skywalker's a potential, Ezra Bridger, Cal Kestis, Quinlan Vos, they're kind of the main ones that spring to mind for me, I think. There might be a few that are kind of slipping my mind, but they're probably the most prominent ones, unless they throw a curveball and have someone like from Legends come in, like Mara Jade or something like that, or if they throw even further curveball and just have a completely new Jedi, so which would be quite cool, and I think I'd be quite up for that. But also, there's a character called Rey Lavros, who is one of my favourite Jedi, and I highly, highly doubt it's Rey Lavros. I can almost guarantee it's not Rey Lavros, but I would love it if he is. He is one of the coolest characters ever. He's in the Claudia Gray book, Master and Apprentice, and he is also in the Cavan Scott audio drama, Dooku Jedi Lost, which I've kind of tackled Rey Lavros in 2 previous episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon. But yeah, anyway, that's who I think it could potentially be, who Grogu reaches out to speak with, but obviously it could be someone else, and there could be someone glaringly obvious that I'm missing, so yeah, anyway. And then other couple of little things is basically Fennec Shand, who is the woman who was with Boba Fett, who has cybernetics in her sort of stomachy area. She was in episode 5 of season 1, so chapter 5, called The Gunslinger. She was meant to be hunting the person that Din Djarin works with when, there's that guy who's meant to go off and kill her. And then obviously right at the end you hear some sort of noise that a lot of people suspected was going to be Boba Fett to kind of get her. And they were correct. And obviously Boba Fett saved her, which is quite cool. Another couple of things. The episode was directed by Robert Rodriguez. I just want to say, I love Robert Rodriguez. He's an amazing director. He made the Spy Kids trilogy, which are interesting films. They're very, very funny if you go into them looking at them like they're funny. He also made one of my favourite films ever, which is From Dusk Till Dawn. He also made Planet Terror, that is amazing. He made Machete and Machete Kills, which are both also amazing. I think he made Sin City. He's made a lot of sort of grindhousey, over-the-top action films. He's made Shark Boy and Lava Girl, but I haven't seen that either. But I love Robert Rodriguez as a director, so when he came up at the end, I was like, oh, that's amazing. Glad he's getting involved in some way. Then the only other couple of things is basically you saw Bill Burr's character, Miggs Mayfield, appear again, which I'm quite excited to because I actually really liked his character from that sort of prison episode in season 1. And then the last other things are there are loads and loads of sort of half unconfirmed celebrity cameos towards the part where Cara Dune was basically flicking through that sort of, you know, all of the people who are prisoners and whatnot in the New Republic jail, and they skimmed through loads of them before getting to Miggs Mayfield. People have managed to translate the Aurebesh that is on there. Now, for clarity, Aurebesh is basically Galactic Basic, which, let's just, for ease, I'm going to call it English, because obviously anyone who watches Star Wars in a different language, the Galactic Basic is the language of whoever's watching it. But just for ease and the standard language it is recorded in, it is English. And English, spoken English, is in the Star Wars universe considered to be Galactic Basic. It's just the general speak that most people can talk. One of the written forms of Galactic Basic is Aurebesh. There are a couple of other forms as well, and I think if you go into Legends, it gets a little bit more convoluted. But essentially, there's a gentleman called Stephen Crane, who was basically the one to interpret and write out Aurebesh's alphabet. So he was the one who kind of made it more sensical and things. And then since then, when they've, you know, remastered certain editions, they've tweaked certain things so it makes sense in Aurebesh, or they've added stuff in, little bits. And instead of being this random scribblings of nonsense language, they've actually started using Aurebesh. So now a lot of people, it's not actually that hard. Like I can't speak Aurebesh necessarily, but in the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, it's really easy. It just shows you, like it says in Aurebesh, Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, and then it says in English directly under it, so you can see it. But you can just Google the Aurebesh alphabet. It's relatively similar to the English alphabet. You know, it's got an A, a B, a C, etc. There's a couple of slight variations, but it is quite interesting that people have gone in there. They've seen these screenshots that are, you know, they've taken a screenshot of something that shows up on screen for like maybe a second, and they've translated the Aurebesh into English so that they know what some of the characters are named. There are literally like loads of them. You can go on Wikipedia and you can find it out. If you go on Wikipedia, type in chapter 14, the tragedy, scroll right down to where it says appearances, and then it just has this big old list of all these character names. I looked at a few of them. There's rumours one of them is Nick Frost, you know, one of the friends of Simon Pegg, who's in a lot of his films. I know he's been in a lot of other stuff, but people probably know him best from Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz and things, and Spaced probably. And then also there is a character, I think it's called Biran Redban or something, and that's meant to be Brian Redband, who is a comedian, and I only really know him that well because I've listened to the Joe Rogan podcast quite a lot, and he's a regular guest and things. So I just want to throw that out there. There's lots of random celebrity cameos that may never push up ever again, but, you know, if I was anyone of vague fame, and someone said, hey, do you want to just take a photo of yourself looking weird and we'll put it in Mandalorian, I would be 100% over that. So I'm quite jealous of all these people, because that would be my dream. Either that or be one of those rebel pilots who just flies and then immediately blows up. Like, that would be quite cool. I wouldn't want to be a proper acting role in Star Wars because you get too much hate and I'm not a very good actor. So it would be quite cool being like a pilot or something. Like, the dream is what Dave Filoni has done, you know, being Trapper Wolf. He absolutely loves wolves. And, you know, he's been in this season and the last season of Mandalorian. He was in that Spiders episode of this season. And it's just one of those things that it would just be really cool to show off me a little pilot and things. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked of nonsensical stuff. But yeah, that is relatively everything I'm going to say about this episode, I think. As I said, it's it's an episode that's all on sort of Tython that I tackled last week, and it's not really shown up in canon very much. It's in like a Dr. Aphra comic, and it's been mentioned in passing. But aside from that, yeah, it's just a lot of new things in here, and stuff of the Boba Fett, I tackled that in episode 1 of this, so yeah, and Aurebesh is a really cool thing that is becoming more and more widespread in the canon, and if you want to do your own Aurebesh translations, you can easily find one online and go do that. I can tell you all that I am not going to be doing that for any of the things, because as much as I love Star Wars, I'm not that into it. I'm not going to translate loads of things. I'll let other people do it because I'm lazy. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening to this nugget of information. I'll flick it back to the hosts, who I believe this week it is Chris and Scott, and then we've got one episode coming out next week as well, who's going to be one of the three hosts, Dave, Chris, or Scott. And then episode 8, which will be chapter 16 of this and the finale of Mandalorian Series 2. Fingers crossed it will be me, Chris, Dave, and Scott. But we'll confirm that close to the time, but I will definitely be showing up on the last episode to give a nice old roundtable discussion on this season of The Mandalorian, and then if there's anything else that pops up in episode 8. But make sure you stay subscribed to Comics in Motion and all that other jazz. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Right, Mr. Weatherly. So thank you so much today, Scott. It's been great again, mate. It really has been good. It's good for us to catch up as well, even getting the wrestling references in there, which is great. So where can everyone get you, my friend?
If they can find me, the usual places, come listen to the podcast. It's 20th Century Geek and Stories Out of Time and Space. And if you want to come speak to us, it's at 20th Century Geek or at Pod Time Space on Twitter.
Good man, good man. And as always, guys, if you want to get in contact with ourselves, at Comics in Motion P on Twitter or the Comics in Motion Podcast at gmail.com. And like Scott just said, 20th Century Geek. And what's the other podcast, Scott?
Stories Out of Time and Space.
Stories Out of Time and Space, which I did watch the other day, actually, when you had your tinfoil hat on.
Oh, no, that's the two guys.
The radio.
Gosh, yeah, that's
right, yeah.
The other thing I did.
Yeah, it comes up on Facebook, that. You actually had foil on your head. I was quite impressed with that. So, yeah. But if you're interested in any of the shows as well, and you do enjoy them, get onto our podcast and drop us all a review. Scott, myself, for comics, VHS, Severance Strikes Back, anything. Get over there, guys. It helps the show get out to more people. So brilliant today, mate. Thank you so much. And I can't wait for the next 2 episodes. I really can't.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I can't wait to talk about the finale as well.
Okay, take care, mate.
Cheers, man. Bye.